Welcome to section 5, validation, error handling and security. In this section, we are going to perform request field validation, we will do error handling and we'll know about security risk and mitigation plans. So let's get started. Request validation. In this video, we will do request field validation for our sign in and sign up form. As a user might access our query via a tool like GraphQL and he may query our GraphQL server for data. Okay, in this kind of cases, if there is invalid username or password, we need to validate those two, right? So we would be performing request field validation to validate our form fields. Okay, and we know about query validation. So let's jump into our code base and set up our validation process for server side. So we are going to perform request validation for our form on server side. So for that, we are going to open our schema.js file and we are going to import a type called GraphQL non-null, which will help us to perform null checks for the form fields. Okay, so let's jump into mutation and let's scroll down, and inside our mutation we see we have a query for sign up and sign in. So there we are going to use this type. So for that we need to wrap this particular GraphQL string type with new graph non-null, and we are going to inside this non-null type. Okay, similarly we are going to do it for sign in. Okay, so this will now GraphQL will know whether the input field, whatever values are coming from the user or from the request, those are not null. So GraphQL will make sure that those values are not null, and in case those are any of these values are coming null, it will throw an error. It will handle those things for us. Okay, so now let's validate whatever field values are coming in case those field values are not coming, but those values are maybe invalid. So for that we are going to create a file called validation.js inside our libs directory. So let's import that file, and within that file we are going to create two functions, email and isValidRange, which will help us to validate our fields inside our sign up and sign in resolver. So for that, first of all, use those functions. So what basically we are doing here is this function isEmail will take one input field, email, and it will perform validations for us. Okay, and in case it returns false as a value, we are going to throw GraphQL error, and GraphQL error is again a type, and we are going to pass this string, appropriate string inside that error message. Okay, and so let's do the same thing for sign in form. So we need to verify this email and password range. Okay, so let's create this file called validation.js inside libs directory. So what we are doing here is we are importing a package called validator, which will help us to easily validate our form fields. Okay, so as we said, we have created two functions. One is isEmail and second is isValidRange. And isEmail will take a parameter called email, which we will pass to this function called isEmail function, and that will return a boolean value whether the given email is correct or it's incorrect. Okay, so it will return true false based on the validation. And isValidRange function will actually see the minimum and maximum characters that are used inside our string. So in case password needs minimum 5 characters, we need to pass mean as 5, which we are passing it over here, and this value will overwrite over here inside our options, and these options is passed as a single object to isByte length method, which will validate whether the characters whatever inside this string value are within this minimum and maximum range. Okay, so this is how we are going to perform validations. Now one more thing which we have to do is inside our authentication, inside resolver, inside sign in function. Okay, so in case we are using user by email where we are passing our request object, and in case user is available, if user is not available we need to throw an error. Okay, because if email is not available, there is doesn't make sense to execute authentication method as user is not at all available. Okay, so we need to perform a validation check over there also. So we'll just put a check whether if user is not available, reject the promise and say email doesn't exist. So in that case user might want to for the to create a user account. So we have performed all our validation operations. Now let's test this. So for that we are going to switch to our terminal and we are going to command called start server instead of start. So we are just starting our server instead of both server and client. Okay. So we'll switch to our browser and we'll open that URL. So let's see. So for sign in, okay, so we need to perform mutation, right? So first of all we need to go to our mutation and sign in, where email we are going to provide as invalid email. So we are going to say ashwin like this at gmail.com, password, and we need user token. Okay, so let's hit it, and password length is incorrect. So we have performed the validation as password needs to be minimum 5 character. So this validation got triggered. Okay, so it didn't went to your email validation also, it just corrected over here only. So let's pass some valid range, and email doesn't exist. The next validation from our resolver got triggered. Okay, in case you are not providing any email or password, let's see what happens. So it says syntax is not correct. These fields are required fields. So if I say email as null and password as null, let's see what happens. And yeah, so expected a type string, found null. So this error validation is done because of type. Null cannot be a string type and email cannot be of a null type. Okay, so this is how we are performing validations in our application. So validations are running. So let's understand about query validation. First of all, a fragment cannot be referred itself or create a cycle, as this could result in unbounded results. As we have seen, a fragment can be used to reusable component, and we don't want to end up in a situation where we are creating a cycle within the query. Okay, so this cannot be done using fragment. And when you are querying for a field, we have to query for the field that exists on a given type. Say for example, if a restaurant returns a restaurant, we need to query for the field on restaurant. Okay, and in case you want to learn more about validations, GraphQL has specific query validations within its system, and you can learn more about those validations inside by clicking on this URL. So let's click there. Okay, and you can see there are number of rules has been created to validate your query, and these rules apply when you are performing any kind of query validations. So this file will help you to understand the inside of GraphQL validation rules.